Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today's video is a new episode of my favorite series, Secrets of Harry Potter. For those of you who are new here, in this series, I uncover the hidden details of the wizarding world that sadly never made it into the films. This series is especially loved by those who never got around to reading the books, but still want to know what secrets were left behind the scenes. Enjoy the video number 1, The Story of Betrayal. Let's start with one of the most tragic and underrated stories, the story of Regulus Black. Who was he? The younger brother of Sirius, a former Death Eater who, unlike many others, dared to rebel against Voldemort himself. In the films, we only hear Creature's brief retelling. Before Master Regulus died, he ordered Creature to destroy it, but no matter how hard Creature tried, he couldn't do it. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows film. But how exactly did Regulus learn about the Horcrux? And how did he end up in that cave where he met his death? The answer, in the book, goes much deeper. One day, the Dark Lord needed a house elf for a dark ritual. Regulus, still devoted to his master, offered Creature. He ordered the elf to obey Voldemort's every command and then return home. There was a basin filled with potion, and the Dark Lord made Creature drink it. Creature drank, and while he drank he saw terrible things. Creature was burning inside, and then the Dark Lord left him on the island. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Voldemort left the elf to die among the Fiendfyre, but he underestimated house elf magic. Creature was able to apparate back home. That's how Regulus learned the truth about Horcruxes. Realizing that Voldemort had hidden a fragment of his soul in the cave, Regulus made a desperate decision. He went there himself. But unlike the Dark Lord, he refused to sacrifice Creature. He drank all the potion and told Creature to go home and destroy the locket. And Creature watched as Master Regulus was dragged under the water. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. He died, but accomplished what no other Death Eater dared. He rose against the evil he once served. The films barely mention his sacrifice, leaving viewers unaware of his quiet heroism. Number 2, In Search of Vanity. Now let's turn to another figure, a symbol of evil and pride, Tom Riddle, the future Lord Voldemort. From the very beginning, Riddle sought not just power but immortality. His path led through the creation of Horcruxes, vessels to contain pieces of his soul. But Tom didn't want to place them in mere trinkets. No, his soul deserved to rest within the relics of the Hogwarts founders. In the films, we only get glimpses, like when he obtains Ravenclaw's diadem from the trusting ghost of Helena. But how did he get the others? The answer lies in the books. After Hogwarts, Tom took a job at the dark artifact shop, Borgin and Burke's, not by chance. There he had access to ancient relics and their wealthy owners. Polite, handsome, clever, he soon earned a special position. Voldemort was sent to persuade people to part with their treasures, and he did it with remarkable success. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. This is how fate brought him to Hepzibah Smith, an elderly collector of magical antiques. Charmed by his manners, she showed him her prized possessions, Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket. You, Tom, can see the history in these things, not just the galleons. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. 2 days later, Hepzibah Smith was dead, supposedly poisoned by her house elf, who had accidentally mixed something into her cocoa. Her relics vanished without a trace. Later, Voldemort visited the Gaunt Shack, his mother's ancestral home. There, he murdered his father and Muggle relatives, framed his Uncle Morphin, and took a family heirloom, Marvolo's ring. He took the ring, pocketed Morphin's wand, and left, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Thus, he obtained relics of 3 of the 4 founders. Rumour had it that he also tried to claim Gryffindor's sword. Perhaps that's why he was so eager to return to Hogwarts as a teacher. Number 3. He meant well. Let's move to one of the most emotional scenes from the Deathly Hallows, the Seven Potters operation. It marked the saga's descent into its darkest chapter. In this scene, Mad-Eye Moody dies and George Weasley loses an ear. At first glance, it seems accidental. A Death Eater's curse gone astray. But think about it. Why would any Death Eater dare attack Harry Potter? They all knew killing the boy who lived was a privilege reserved for Voldemort alone. The shocking truth, the spell came from Severus Snape. His hood fell off during the chase, and Sectum Sempra was always Snape's signature spell. Remus Lupin, Harry Potter, and the Deathly Hallows. This entire moment was cut from the movie, so viewers never learned that Snape was the one who injured George. Why? Because Snape didn't mean to. He was aiming at a Death Eater attacking Lupin, and missed. "Sectum Sempra!" Snape shouted, but the curse struck George instead. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Had this scene made it into the film, hatred towards Snape after Dumbledore's murder would have doubled, and his redemption later would have hit even harder. But the filmmakers chose to omit it to avoid overcomplicating the story. And yet it's these small, painful imperfections that make the characters feel real, flawed, broken, and deeply human. Number 4, a strange omission. And finally, the mystery that puzzled many. Why didn't Voldemort take the prophecy himself? In Order of the Phoenix, everything revolves around that fragile glass orb he desperately wants. The film gives a simple explanation. Only those about whom the prophecy was made can retrieve it. Lucius Malfoy, Harry Potter, and the Order of the Phoenix film. Logical? Not quite. He could have easily sent his Death Eaters to steal it, even if they couldn't open it. The books, however, reveal the truth. Only those to whom the prophecy refers can remove it from the shelf unharmed. Otherwise, they'd be driven insane or worse. Albus Dumbledore, Harry Potter, and the Order of the Phoenix. So it wasn't just about opening it. Even touching it was deadly for anyone else. The sphere was protected by ancient enchantments. One wrong move could mean madness or death. That's why Voldemort lured Harry to the Department of Mysteries, to make him retrieve it. The exact mechanism of the curse is never explained, but it's implied that even passing the orb hand to hand wouldn't nullify its power. The magic of prophecies is old, dangerous, and merciless. Number 5, the mystery of the 3 brothers. The tale of the 3 brothers is more than a bedtime story. In the films, it's a haunting animation, 3 figures, 3 gifts, and the shadow of death. But in the books, it carries a deeper truth. Many believe the tale to be nothing more than a legend. Yet the Deathly Hallows themselves were thought to be myth, until Dumbledore proved otherwise, says the Tales of Beedle the Bard. That single line changes everything. It suggests the story may not be fiction at all. The brothers, Antioch, Cadmus, and Ignotus Peverell, might have truly existed. Their relics, scattered across history, shaped the fate of wizards who sought them, including Harry himself. Dumbledore, in his wisdom and guilt, saw in the Hallows not power, but meaning. The Elder Wand stood for dominance, the Resurrection Stone for regret, and the Cloak of Invisibility for humility. Those who seek to conquer death, he wrote, only become its servants. Harry, unlike any before him, didn't crave power. He returned the wand, let the stone fall, and wore the cloak not to rule but to protect. He became the only wizard who embodied all three hallows, and survived because he chose to meet death as an equal, not an enemy. The films showed the legend. The books revealed the truth. The story of the three brothers was never about defeating death, but about learning to walk beside it. Number 6, the fate of Dudley Dursley. Dudley Dursley begins the story as the perfect symbol of everything wrong with Harry's childhood, spoiled, cruel, and blind to his cousin's suffering. But by the end of the books he becomes something entirely different. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, as the Dursleys prepare to go into hiding, Dudley hesitates. He walks up to Harry, frowning awkwardly, and says the unthinkable, "I don't think you're a waste of space." For Harry, it's more powerful than any apology. That single sentence erases years of silence and cruelty. It's the moment when Dudley finally sees Harry not as a freak, but as family. Films erased this scene, and with it, Dudley's redemption. Yet in Rowling's notes and interviews, we learn that their story didn't end there. Years later, Harry and Dudley meet occasionally, tea shared between men who have nothing in common except the ghosts of their childhood. Their conversations are brief, polite, even warm in their awkwardness. They'll never be close, but they've forgiven each other. And in that quiet understanding, the cupboard under the stairs finally closes for good. Number 7, the unknown love of Lupin and Tonks. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks are barely given time to love in the films. One moment they appear side by side, and the next they're gone, married, with a child, and then dead. But in the books their story unfolds with quiet pain and courage. Lupin, haunted by his curse as a werewolf, cannot believe he deserves happiness. Tonks, younger and full of reckless affection, loves him anyway. When Dumbledore dies, Lupin's fear consumes him. He leaves Tonks behind, convinced that his cursed blood will destroy her life. The confrontation that follows is one of the most powerful moments in the Deathly Hallows. Harry turns on his former teacher in anger. "You think I don't know what this is about? You're afraid of your own child." It's a brutal, necessary truth. Those words tear through Lupin's guilt and remind him what real bravery means. Not fighting monsters, but facing love. The scene never made it into the movie, and without it, viewers never saw the man beneath the monster. They never saw the father learning to forgive himself. When Lupin finally returns to Tonks, it feels like light returning to a dark world. They name their son Teddy, a child of hope born in the shadow of war. And that is what makes their deaths at Hogwarts unbearable. They aren't just casualties of battle. They are a promise unfulfilled. In the stillness of the Great Hall, their hands lie almost touching, two warriors who finally found peace only to lose it again. Their story, left untold on screen, reminds us that love in the wizarding world is not just magic, it's defiance against despair. Number 8. The Secret of Professor Binns. Professor Cuthbert Binns is the only teacher at Hogwarts who is quite literally dead. Yet he never stopped teaching. One morning, after dying quietly in the staff room, he simply rose from his chair, left his body behind, and drifted into his next class as a ghost. He died in his sleep in the staff room and got up next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him, the book says, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The students barely reacted. For them he was as dull and lifeless as ever, but beneath that humour lies something haunting. A man so consumed by duty that even death couldn't make him rest. In class, Binns spoke in a dry monotone about goblin rebellions and magical wars, his voice so boring it could make even Hermione's head nod. Yet his lessons carried something strange, a sense that Hogwarts itself existed outside of time. He was a living reminder, or rather an unliving one, that the castle kept its teachers and stories forever. He never aged, never learned, never stopped. His eternal lecture became a symbol of how magic could freeze people in their own patterns, a ghost of tradition that never lets go. The films erased him completely. Perhaps he was too odd, too still for the fast-moving plot. But without Binns, Hogwarts loses a piece of its mystery, that eerie suggestion that the school isn't just alive but aware, holding on to those who can't let go. In the silence of an empty classroom, you can almost imagine him still there, droning softly about ancient wizards, unaware that centuries have passed. In his endless teaching, Professor Binns became more than a ghost. He became the heartbeat of the castle that never dies. Number 9. The Forgotten Prophecy of Trelawney. Most viewers remember Sybil Trelawney for her clinking beads, wild hair, and dramatic predictions that rarely came true. But hidden beneath her eccentricity lies a chilling accuracy that the films never explored. Long before the final battle, she made another prophecy, one that unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, yet struck with deadly precision. During a dinner at the Three Broomsticks in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Trelawney refused to join the others at the table. "When 13 dine together, the first to rise will be the first to die," she whispered. The others laughed it off as one of her strange moods, but they didn't count carefully enough. There were indeed 13 people present, if you included Scabbers, the rat resting in Ron Weasley's pocket. That rat was Peter. Pettigrew, an unregistered animagus, and one of Lord Voldemort's most devoted followers. Not long after that dinner, the prophecy came true. The first to rise from the table was Sirius Black. Months later, Sirius fell through the veil in the Department of Mysteries. The first to rise will be the first to die. A line once dismissed as superstition became an echo of fate itself. It was one of those rare moments in the series where destiny hides in plain sight, not in a glowing orb or a dark vision, but in an offhand remark from a woman nobody believed. The films turned Trelawney into comic relief, a spectacle of scarves and incense. But in the books she's something far more unsettling, a true seer trapped inside a mind too fragile to bear her own gift. Her prophecies are not performances, they are warnings. And if this forgotten one proved anything, it's that in Rowling's world even the strangest voice can speak the purest truth. Number 10. The Untold Story of Professor McGonagall. Before she became the unshakable deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, Minerva McGonagall was a young woman who knew love and heartbreak. Her story, hidden from the films, reveals a side of her that few ever see. Before Hogwarts claimed her life, a muggle named Dougal McGregor proposed to her. She said yes. But that night, the weight of two worlds crashed down on her. To marry him would mean breaking the international statute of secrecy, risking the exposure of magic itself. By dawn, she ended the engagement, leaving behind the man she loved to protect the world she was bound to serve. Minerva never truly forgot Dougal. Years dulled the pain, but her heart remained just a little colder, wrote J.K. Rowling in the Pottermore archives. That single sentence says more than any film scene ever could. It explains the quiet sadness behind McGonagall's eyes, the reason her compassion hides beneath iron discipline. Every rule she enforces, every sacrifice she demands from her students, they are reflections of her own choices. Later in life, she found love again with Elphinstone Urquhart, a kind and patient wizard from the Ministry of Magic. For a time, she allowed herself peace. They lived together in a small cottage near Hogsmeade, away from the noise of the world. But happiness, as she had learned, rarely lasts. Elphinstone died suddenly in a tragic accident, and Minerva returned to Hogwarts, where duty filled the emptiness left by grief. The castle became her refuge, its walls the only constant in a life of loss. The films show her as stern and composed, a woman carved from stone. But the books reveal something far more human. Behind every sharp command and lifted eyebrow lies a broken heart that chose service over comfort. McGonagall's strength was not born from power, but from endurance. She loved deeply, lost everything, and kept going, and perhaps that is why Hogwarts itself seems to stand taller when she walks its halls. Number 11, The Tragic Fate of Colin Creevey. Colin Creevey was never meant to be a hero. He was the boy with a camera, the first to ask Harry for an autograph, the one who saw magic as pure wonder. While others were born into the wizarding world, Colin stepped into it with wide eyes and endless admiration. Yet beneath his enthusiasm was something far greater, a heart untouched by fear. He never wanted glory, he simply believed in good. When the Battle of Hogwarts began, Professor McGonagall ordered all underage students to leave the castle. Colin was told to stay away, to stay safe, but he couldn't. He slipped back into Hogwarts through the secret passages, his camera left behind, replaced by courage. In the chaos of curses and falling walls, he fought beside older students, not because he thought he could win, but because he couldn't stand aside while others defended what he loved. In the book, the aftermath is brief, but devastating. 2 bodies were carried by Padma and Ernie. One of them was Colin Creevey. He looked so small, as if he shouldn't have been there at all. Those lines from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows strike harder than any battle scene. There's no grand farewell, no slow-motion heroism, just silence. The boy who once idolized Harry Potter became a symbol of the bravery that asks for nothing in return. The films left him out entirely, no mention, no farewell, as if his story didn't matter, but in truth, Colin's death is one of the purest moments in the entire saga. He reminds us that heroism isn't about strength or prophecy. It's about innocence, standing against darkness. Colin Creevey never grew up to be a great wizard, but he died with a courage even the greatest could envy. Number 12, Slughorn's Hidden Guilt. In the world of Hogwarts, few professors are as deceptively complex as Horace Slughorn. In The Half-Blood Prince, he is introduced as a genial, slightly vain old man who enjoys fine wines, lavish meals, and the company of promising students. The film adaptation paints him as a harmless eccentric, an aging teacher seeking redemption for an unspecified mistake. But in the book, J.K. Rowling's narrative reveals a much darker truth. Slughorn was not merely a man haunted by embarrassment or cowardice. He was a man living under the crushing weight of guilt. His charm and refinement concealed the memory of one conversation, a moment of weakness that helped shape the most dangerous wizard in history. Years before Voldemort became a name spoken only in whispers, he was Tom Riddle, a brilliant and manipulative student. Slughorn admired him, as he did all talented pupils. Riddle was handsome, polite, intelligent, and gifted with a quiet intensity that drew people in. Slughorn saw in him a reflection of his own ambition, a young man destined for greatness. That admiration blinded him. It made him ignore the shadows behind Riddle's curiosity. When the young Slytherin approached him after a Slug Club meeting, asking theoretical questions about the nature of the soul, Slughorn did not sense danger. He saw only a clever boy eager to learn beyond his years. In that fateful conversation, Riddle asked the question that would define the rest of his life. What if someone wanted to split his soul, to make himself immortal? Slughorn hesitated, sensing something unnatural, but he answered. He spoke of Horcruxes, dark objects created through murder to anchor fragments of the soul. He admitted that the act required killing, that it was among the darkest of magics, but he did not shut the door entirely. He did not say, "This is evil and you must never seek it." He treated the question as academic curiosity. That was his sin. Later, when the world learned who Voldemort had become, Slughorn buried that memory deep within himself. He erased and altered the scene in his mind, even magically editing it when Harry later sought the truth. Rowling describes the falsified memory. In it, Riddle merely asks a harmless question and Slughorn dismisses it without consequence. But Dumbledore knew better. He told Harry that this missing truth was the key to understanding Voldemort's weakness. Slughorn's guilt was so overwhelming that he preferred to rewrite history rather than face the knowledge of what he had done. In the book, when Harry finally retrieves the unaltered memory, the real horror becomes clear. Slughorn's voice trembles. His tone changes from jovial to terrified as he realizes what Riddle truly seeks. "You mean you've done it already? You've split your soul?" he gasps. Riddle does not answer, but his eyes gleam with triumph. In that instant, Slughorn becomes the unwilling witness to the birth of Lord Voldemort. The movie shows this exchange only briefly, stripped of emotion. But in the novel, the scene vibrates with dread. Slughorn's horror is not only moral, it is prophetic. He knows he has given a monster the key to eternal life. After that day, Slughorn's entire life became an act of running away, from the truth, from Dumbledore, from his own reflection. He left Hogwarts before Voldemort's rise, changing homes and disguises, always fearing recognition. When Harry and Dumbledore find him years later, he is hiding as an armchair. Rowling describes him pale, trembling, and aged far beyond his years, surrounded by empty wine bottles. His charm has withered into cowardice. But beneath that fear lies something deeper, a silent cry for forgiveness. He is a man who has seen the consequences of one careless moment and has spent decades trying to forget. His guilt explains everything about him. His obsession with successful students, the Slug Club, is not vanity alone. It is an unconscious attempt to prove that he still has the power to influence the world for good. Every famous witch and wizard he mentored serves as a counterweight to the evil he once inspired. When he boasts that one of his students invented the wolfsbane potion or became a high-ranking official in the ministry, he is not simply bragging. He is telling himself, "See, I made something good too." But no matter how many brilliant students he produces, the shadow of Tom Riddle never leaves him. The film adaptation simplifies this complexity, presenting Slughorn as a comical old professor whose only fault is fear. Yet in the book, fear is only the surface. Beneath it lies the unbearable burden of moral complicity. Dumbledore understands this and approaches him not with anger, but with compassion. He tells Harry, "You must understand that Horace is ashamed, deeply ashamed. Slughorn is not evil, he is human." And that humanity makes his story one of the most tragic in the entire series. His arc also mirrors a central theme of the Half-Blood Prince, that evil does not arise in isolation. It feeds on weakness, vanity, and the small moments when good people look away. Slughorn did not create Voldemort, but he made it easier for him to exist. His story is a reminder that even brilliance and kindness can become dangerous when mixed with moral blindness. Rowling subtly places him in contrast to other professors, Snape, who chooses to fight his inner darkness, and Dumbledore, who faces his past mistakes head-on. Slughorn, in contrast, hides. He represents the quiet guilt of those who enable evil by refusing to confront it. Number 13, Crabbe's fate and why he was replaced. In the final installment of the Harry Potter saga, The Deathly Hallows, there's a small but striking absence that few casual viewers ever noticed. When the trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, find themselves face to face with Draco Malfoy, Gregory Goyle, and another Slytherin in the Room of Requirement, something feels subtly off. Fans who had grown up watching the films sensed that something was missing. It was not the room's eerie transformation into a warehouse of forgotten artifacts, nor the flames that would soon consume it. It was the missing presence of one familiar face, Vincent Crabbe. Instead, another student stands awkwardly beside Malfoy and Goyle, taking his place without explanation. The silent replacement left a gap not only in the lineup, but also in the story's symbolic heart. In J.K. Rowling's books, Crabbe's final moment is one of chaotic redemption. For 7 years, he had been portrayed as the archetype of a bully, dense, cruel, and fiercely loyal to Draco. Yet in the end, it is he, not a noble hero, who sets off the chain of events that leads to the destruction of one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Crabbe, Rowling writes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, had conjured Fiendfyre, a fire so powerful it could not be contained. The magic was uncontrollable, wild, and lethal, a spell so forbidden that even most Death Eaters avoided it. Within moments, the enchanted flames consumed the Room of Requirement, swallowing treasures and curses alike. Among them was Ravenclaw's lost diadem, a Horcrux that would have survived had Crabbe not unleashed his destructive fury. The irony is sharp and deliberate. Rowling crafted this moment to show that evil often collapses under the weight of its own recklessness. Crabbe, blinded by rage and fear, unleashed the very weapon that would destroy a piece of his master's soul. In one explosive act, he became the unwilling instrument of Voldemort's downfall. The fire was alive, Rowling wrote. It was a monster, moving with purpose, forming snakes, birds, and monsters of flame that consumed everything they touched. As the inferno rose around them, Harry, Ron, and Hermione scrambled to escape, while Draco and Goyle struggled to survive the chaos unleashed by their friend's folly. Crabbe did not make it out. The fire he created became both his executioner and his final act of contribution to the war. Against darkness, in the films, however, this moment was stripped of its deeper meaning. The absence of Jamie Waylett, the actor who portrayed Crabbe, forced the filmmakers to rewrite the scene. Waylett had been arrested in real life, accused of possessing drugs and later involved in unrelated legal troubles. By the time Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 was filmed, the studio had already decided that he would not return. The production team faced a dilemma: how to preserve a scene that was essential to the plot without the character responsible for it. Their solution was to quietly replace Crabbe with Blaise Zabini, a background character who had appeared briefly in earlier films but had never played a significant role in the narrative. Blaise Zabini, portrayed by Louis Cordes, was a mysterious Slytherin introduced in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince as part of Professor Slughorn's Slug Club. He was known for his striking looks and aloof manner, the son of a famously beautiful witch who had married multiple wealthy wizards, all of whom died under suspicious circumstances. Zabini's presence in the final film was unexpected, almost confusing. He had no connection to the Fiendfyre in the books, no reason to be involved in that climactic moment. Yet there he was, running beside Draco and Goyle through the labyrinth of hidden relics, caught in a disaster that did not belong to him. The decision may have solved a production problem, but it came at a narrative cost. In the book, Crabbe's death was not just another casualty of war. It was a turning point, a grim reminder that destruction often comes from within. His reckless magic symbolized the self-devouring nature of evil. By replacing him with Zabini, the film lost that layer of symbolism. The destruction of the diadem became accidental rather than poetic. It was no longer the result of a lifetime of cruelty turning inward, but merely another visual spectacle. The audience saw fire, the readers had seen fate. This change also weakened Draco Malfoy's arc. In the novel, Draco's reaction to Crabbe's death is one of horror and helplessness. The boy who had once strutted around Hogwarts with arrogance and cruelty suddenly faces the irreversible consequence of his alliances. He loses one of his oldest friends, not to a noble cause, but to meaningless violence. Rowling used that moment to peel away the last of Draco's bravado. When Harry saves Draco and Goyle from the flames, it is an act that forces Draco to confront a truth he had long avoided. The people he thought were his allies were victims of their own ignorance. The film version, by removing Crabbe, dulled that emotional sting. Draco's guilt, his quiet realization of complicity, never had the same weight on screen. The Fiendfyre itself is one of Rowling's most haunting inventions, a literal manifestation of chaos and greed. It burned with a heat that made the air shimmer, the book says. The flames were reaching higher, taking shape, devouring the very walls. It is a spell that reflects its caster's soul, uncontrollable, consuming, destructive. That Crabbe was the one to conjure it was not accidental. He was never a mastermind, only a follower. Yet in his final act, he created something greater than himself, a fire that both destroyed and redeemed. By erasing that from the film, the adaptation lost a rare moment of moral complexity, where even a villain's stupidity served a greater good. Number 14, The Love That Never Was, Cho Chang. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, there exists a story that the films only touched on briefly, a story of grief, confusion, and the kind of love that isn't really love at all. It is the relationship between Harry Potter and Cho Chang, a fragile connection born not out of passion but out of shared loss. In the movies, it appears as a short-lived teenage romance, reduced to a single kiss and a few awkward encounters. But in J.K. Rowling's book, their relationship is a mirror held up to the turmoil of adolescence, where emotions are raw, timing is wrong, and neither side truly knows how to love yet. When Harry first notices Cho in the Goblet of Fire, she is not just another pretty face at Hogwarts. She is bright, kind, popular, and, most importantly, attached to Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff champion. To Harry, she represents something beyond his reach, normalcy, peace, and the idea of innocent affection. But the Triwizard Tournament changes everything. Cedric's death at the end of that book tears open a wound in Cho's life that never really heals. The girl who once smiled with grace becomes a shadow of her former self. And when the Order of the Phoenix begins, Harry finds himself both drawn to her and burdened by the same loss that destroyed her sense of security. Their connection begins in the ashes of tragedy. Harry, having witnessed Cedric's murder at the hands of Voldemort, becomes the only living soul who truly knows what happened that night in the graveyard. Cho sees in him not just a boy she once liked, but a companion in grief. It's this shared trauma that draws them together. Rowling writes, Cho's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him. She seemed to be trying to say something, but no words came. The silence between them isn't romantic, it's haunted. They both carry ghosts, but instead of comforting one another, they end up facing reflections of their own pain. Harry, only 15, does not understand the depth of Cho's sorrow. His own trauma is still too fresh, his mind too consumed by fear and anger to offer her real empathy. When they meet in the room of requirement, surrounded by other students training under Dumbledore's army, he feels awkward in her presence, unsure of what to say. Yet he also feels drawn to her sadness, mistaking it for connection. Cho, in turn, mistakes Harry's attention for comfort. They cling to one another like two people drowning, neither realizing that what they share isn't love, it's loneliness. The kiss they share after a DA meeting is one of the most famous moments in the series, but also one of the most misunderstood. In the book, Rowling doesn't describe it as passionate or triumphant. It's wet, awkward, and full of tears. She was crying, Harry tells Hermione later. She just started crying. The films replaced that complexity with a neat, cinematic moment of teenage sweetness. But in truth, the scene in the novel captures the clumsy, uncomfortable first brush with intimacy. It isn't about romance at all, it's about confusion. Cho kisses Harry not because she loves him, but because she misses Cedric. Harry kisses her not because he understands her, but because he wants to feel wanted. Rowling uses this fragile relationship to explore how grief distorts affection. Cho's mourning for Cedric bleeds into every interaction she has with Harry. She wants him to talk about Cedric to keep his memory alive. Harry, however, can't bear to relive that night. Every mention of Cedric reminds him of fear and failure. When Cho breaks down in tears, Harry feels irritated, even guilty for not being able to make her stop. He wants simple affection, something that feels like normal life, but what she needs is healing. They speak different emotional languages, and their inability to understand each other turns their brief romance into a painful misunderstanding. The scene in Madame Puddifoot's tea shop during Valentine's Day encapsulates the failure of their connection. Rowling paints it as almost comically uncomfortable. Cho wants to talk about her feelings, her jealousy of Hermione, and the pain of Cedric's death. Harry, meanwhile, keeps thinking about Quidditch practice and how strange everything feels. He wished he could vanish through the floor, the book says. Cho, sensing his detachment, lashes out. You wanted me to forget him as soon as you came along. That one sentence exposes the rift between them. For Cho, love is loyalty to a memory. For Harry, love should be a way to move forward. They can't reconcile those meanings. The films skip over that emotional tension entirely. Instead, they make Cho a secondary character who betrays the DA under the influence of Veritaserum, erasing the nuance that Rowling built in the novel. In truth, Cho never meant to hurt Harry. Her actions were the result of manipulation and misplaced trust. The book shows that she's torn between loyalty to her friend Marietta Edgecombe and her growing distance from Harry. When he fails to understand her perspective, she grows bitter, and their relationship collapses not because of betrayal, but because of emotional immaturity. Number 15, the invisible heroism of Neville Longbottom. Neville Longbottom was never meant to be the hero of prophecy. From the very first pages of the Philosopher's Stone, he appears clumsy, timid, and insecure. A boy who loses his toad and trembles in front of Professor Snape. Yet beneath that timid surface was a quiet resilience, a strength that would only reveal itself when the world began to crumble. What the films failed to show is that Neville's courage was not born in the final battle with Voldemort. It was forged over years of humiliation, loss, and unwavering loyalty. His invisible journey is not one of sudden bravery, but of persistence in the face of despair. In the Order of the Phoenix, we first see the beginning of his transformation. During Dumbledore's army meetings, Neville's spells are weak, his wand movements uncertain. But he keeps coming back. He practices long after others leave, driven by something that none of his classmates fully understand. It is during one of these lessons that Hermione notices his progress, and Harry's encouragement gives him hope. Neville's confidence had increased under Harry's tutelage, Rowling writes, and that small sentence holds the seed of everything to come. Beneath his nervous exterior lies an unyielding will, the kind that can only belong to someone who has already lost everything and refuses to lose himself. Neville's parents, Alice and Frank Longbottom, were heroes of the First War. Tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange, they never recognized their son again. The films merely hint at this pain, but in the book, the moment Neville visits St. Mungo's hospital is unforgettable. He doesn't speak of his suffering, he hides it. When his mother offers him a gum wrapper, the only gift she can give, he quietly pockets it, unwilling to throw it away. That single act defines him, the boy who takes what little love remains and treasures it as if it were gold. From that moment, Neville's quiet grief transforms into fuel. He doesn't crave revenge, he craves dignity. For his parents, for himself, and for everyone who was broken by the war. As the years pass, he grows into that promise. In Half-Blood Prince, Neville is one of the few who join the fight at the Battle of the Astronomy Tower. The films cut this moment short, but in the book, Neville fights side by side with Harry, Luna, and Ginny. He is injured, yet he refuses to stay behind. This is no longer the same boy who once melted his cauldron in potions. This is a young man who understands what it means to stand and fight, even when the odds are impossible. Dumbledore's army is not just a secret club anymore. It becomes a seed of rebellion that Neville will later nurture when the darkness takes over Hogwarts. When Severus Snape becomes headmaster and the Carrows, Death Eaters, take control of the school, Hogwarts turns into a place of fear. Students are punished with torture and obedience is demanded at every corner. It is here that Neville's real story begins. The films leap straight to his final act with the sword, but in the Deathly Hallows we see an entirely different Neville, one who has become a leader. Neville stood in the middle of the crowd, battered but defiant, his face bruised and his expression fearless, Rowling writes. He is no longer the awkward boy who stutters when speaking. He is now the one others look to for courage. Neville transforms the Room of Requirement into a refuge, a living heart of resistance. The room becomes unrecognizable. Hammocks, blankets, supplies and food appear to shelter those who have been targeted. It is Neville who organizes everything, making sure the younger students are safe. The quote from the book captures it perfectly. He stood at the head of a small army of students. He had turned the Room of Requirement into a fortress. This wasn't an act of impulse. It was leadership born out of empathy and necessity. He becomes what Hogwarts needs most, a symbol that hope still exists even when Dumbledore is gone and Harry is missing. The Carrows, Alecto and Amicus see him as a problem that must be destroyed. They beat him, threaten him and try to break his spirit, but Neville refuses to bend. When asked in the book why he doesn't just run away, he answers simply, "They'd have to kill me before I stop fighting." It's a line that doesn't appear in the films but defines his moral spine. He chooses to stay behind, not because he believes he can win, but because someone has to protect those who cannot defend themselves. This quiet defiance makes him far braver than the boy who once drew the sword from the Sorting Hat. The Room of Requirement under Neville's watch becomes a microcosm of the resistance. Students from all houses and even Slytherins who have turned against the Death Eaters find shelter there. He arranges for food to be smuggled in through hidden passages and coordinates messages with the outside world. When Luna Lovegood and Ginny Weasley have to flee, Neville stays. He tells them to keep fighting, and his message spreads through whispers. Hogwarts still resists. In those moments, Neville carries on Harry's legacy without even knowing if Harry is alive. In the book, there's a powerful passage describing his condition during this time. His face is scarred, his clothes torn, but his eyes burn with purpose. He looked like a man who had lived through war already. Rowling writes, "It is haunting because it reminds us that Neville's transformation didn't happen overnight. It came from enduring pain in silence, from being underestimated again and again until he stopped needing approval. His leadership is not loud or arrogant. It is the kind of leadership that grows from compassion and endurance." When Harry finally returns to Hogwarts, Neville doesn't hesitate. He greets him as an equal, not as a follower. The films reduce this reunion to a brief moment of recognition, but the book gives it weight. "I knew you'd come," Neville says, smiling through bruises. It's not hero worship. It's faith in the idea that good still has a chance. At that moment, we see how similar Neville and Harry truly are. Both have lost their parents to Voldemort's cruelty, both have lived under the shadow of prophecy, and both have chosen not hatred, but courage. The final battle cements this parallel. When Voldemort commands his followers to surrender, Neville steps forward. The book captures it vividly. Neville limped forward, still clutching the sorting hat. He was shaking, but his voice was steady as he said, "I'll join you when hell freezes over." The films show his defiance, but they miss the layers behind it, the weight of every loss, every bruise, every moment he chose to fight when others fled. This is not the triumph of a foolhardy boy, but the culmination of years of unseen struggle. And then, of course, comes the moment everyone remembers, Neville drawing the sword of Gryffindor and slaying Nagini. In the movie, it's an act of a cinematic glory, the fire, triumph and music, but in the book it is quiet, almost sacred. He doesn't kill the snake to earn glory, he does it because someone has to. Harry is down, Ron and Hermione are fighting for their lives, and Voldemort's final Horcrux still slithers. Neville steps up because that's what he's always done, filled the silence where others hesitated. The sword comes to him because it recognizes his heart. Only a true Gryffindor could have drawn it, and by that moment, Neville has earned the title more completely than anyone else alive. After the war, Neville doesn't chase fame or power. He becomes a professor of herbology at Hogwarts. A quiet life, nurturing young students, tending to plants that heal instead of destroy. It's a perfect ending for him, one that the films barely touch upon. His courage was never about the spotlight, it was about perseverance, loyalty, and kindness. When students later hear about the war, they might remember Harry's scar or Voldemort's name, but Neville's legacy lives in something more subtle, the belief that ordinary people can become extraordinary when they refuse to surrender to fear. In many ways, Neville's journey mirrors the one that Harry could have taken had the prophecy chosen differently. As Dumbledore once said, it is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. Neville chose compassion over bitterness, action over silence, and humility over pride. His invisible heroism, hidden between the pages of the books, shows that true courage is not always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it grows in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to shine. Neville Longbottom's story is the untold backbone of the Harry Potter saga, the quiet echo behind every grand act of heroism. The films gave us the flash of his sword, but the books gave us his heart, and perhaps that is his greatest legacy, that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to give up. Number 16. The Tragedy of Ariana Dumbledore. In the shadowed corners of Dumbledore's past lies a story that the films chose to leave almost untouched, a story that explains not only the great wizard's brilliance, but also his pain. Behind the twinkle in his eyes and the calm voice that guided generations of Hogwarts students was a wound that never healed, the tragedy of his sister, Ariana Dumbledore. Her name is spoken only briefly in the films, yet in the books, it echoes like a ghost through Albus's life. The truth about her is not simply sad, it is the very key to understanding why Dumbledore feared power more than any dark wizard ever could. Ariana was born into a family that had once believed magic was a gift. Percival and Kendra Dumbledore raised their 3 children, Albus, Aberforth, and Ariana, in Godric's Hollow, far from the prying eyes of the ministry. They lived quietly, happily even, until one day when Ariana, still only 6, was seen by Muggle boys performing magic in the garden. Her magic was innocent, a child's instinctive wonder, but for those boys it was an abomination. They attacked her, tried to force her to show them again, and when she could not, they beat her. It was not merely physical harm, it shattered something. Inside her, her magic, once a joy, turned wild, unpredictable, dangerous, uncontrollable. The books tell us through Aberforth's trembling confession that from that day forward, Ariana was never the same. She was never right again, he says in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. She wouldn't use magic, but she couldn't get rid of it either. It turned inward and drove her mad. It exploded out of her when she couldn't control it. The world saw a frail girl, but within her raged a storm, bursts of uncontrolled power that could level a room or worse. It was a kind of magical illness born from trauma and fear, and it consumed her life. Percival Dumbledore, Ariana's father, sought revenge. In a moment of fury and helplessness, he attacked the Muggle boys who had destroyed his daughter's mind. He was arrested and sent to Azkaban, where he died. He refused to tell the ministry what had truly happened, knowing that if they discovered Ariana's condition, she would be taken away, institutionalized or worse, experimented upon. So he kept silent, bearing the title of a violent man rather than expose his daughter to the cruelty of the wizarding world. The shame of the Dumbledore name began there, long before Albus ever met Grindelwald. Kendra moved the family to a secluded home, hiding Ariana's condition from everyone. Albus, brilliant and ambitious, went on to Hogwarts and quickly became a prodigy, winning prizes, dazzling professors, and earning a reputation as one of the greatest minds of his age. But while he thrived, his mother carried the burden of caring for a daughter whose magic could erupt at any moment. Albus loved his family, but part of him was blind to their suffering, believing greatness awaited him far beyond the boundaries of Godric's Hollow. It was a blindness that would cost him everything. When Albus returned home after graduation, tragedy struck again. Ariana, in one of her magical outbursts, accidentally caused her mother's death. Kendra's body was found in the wreckage of their home. Though the ministry called it an accident, the truth was unbearable. Aberforth, who had always stayed close to Ariana, blamed Albus for being absent, for chasing glory while their mother bore the impossible weight alone. From that day, the relationship between the brothers was scarred. Aberforth's anger would later erupt in a duel that broke not just their wands, but their hearts. The summer that followed was the turning point of Albus Dumbledore's life. Left as the head of the family, he was trapped, forced to care for his broken sister while watching his dreams of travel and achievement fade. He felt cheated by fate, frustrated by responsibility. It was then that fate brought another boy into his life, a boy whose mind and ambition mirrored his own. Gellert Grindelwald, a brilliant and dangerous young wizard, expelled from Durmstrang, moved into the home of his great-aunt Bathilda Bagshot, Dumbledore's neighbour in Godric's Hollow. The meeting between Albus and Gellert was like the collision of two stars. They spoke for hours, sharing ideas about magic, about changing the world, about a new order where wizards would rule for the greater good. For Albus, Grindelwald was more than a friend. He was a mirror reflecting the person he wished to be, powerful, visionary, unrestrained by guilt. Together they dreamed of a world without secrecy, without Muggle oppression. But beneath their ideals lay something darker, the temptation of dominance. The phrase, "for the greater good," became their motto, a justification for whatever they desired. What Albus failed to see was that Grindelwald's hunger for power came from a place of cruelty, while his own came from idealism twisted by grief. Aberforth tried to stop them. He accused Albus of neglecting Ariana, of letting Grindelwald fill his head with dangerous dreams while their sister languished in the shadows. In the Deathly Hallows, Aberforth recalls the confrontation with a bitterness that time never erased. He thought it all so exciting and clever, the plans they were making, but Ariana was ill, and she needed looking after, and Albus just didn't want to see. His words strip away the legend and reveal a brother still mourning not just his sister, but the man Albus could have been. The argument that followed escalated into violence. Aberforth confronted Albus, shouting that he would no longer allow Ariana to be ignored. Grindelwald, never one to tolerate defiance, drew his wand. A duel erupted in the small house, spells flying, shouts echoing, magic crackling through the air. And then, amidst the chaos, a flash. One spell, whose wand it came from no one ever knew, struck Ariana. The light faded, the room fell silent, and she was gone. That moment defined Albus Dumbledore for the rest of his life. The guilt was unbearable. In the book, he confesses to Harry years later, his voice trembling with old grief, "I was gifted, I was brilliant, I wanted glory, and I got my wish at a terrible cost." Her death shattered the illusion of righteousness he had built with Grindelwald. Whatever dreams they shared turned to ash. Grindelwald fled, leaving Albus to bury his sister and his ambitions. It is no coincidence that Dumbledore refused the position of Minister for Magic, even though he was offered it more than once. Power frightened him because he knew what it could do, not to others, but to himself. The films never fully show this inner torment, portraying him only as a wise and patient mentor. But the books reveal that his wisdom was paid for in suffering. His belief that it is our choices that show what we truly are was not mere philosophy, it was a confession. Years later, when he met Harry Potter, Dumbledore saw in the boy echoes of his own youth, courage mixed with recklessness, love shadowed by loss. He loved Harry not as a student, but as a surrogate son, someone he hoped would not repeat his mistakes. Yet even then his guilt made him cautious. He withheld truths, delayed revelations, and orchestrated events with painful precision, afraid that his own influence might once again bring destruction. His treatment of Harry, both protective and manipulative, reflects a man still trying to make peace with the ghost of Ariana. The death of his sister also explains Dumbledore's fascination with death itself. His study of the Deathly Hallows, especially the Resurrection Stone, was not driven by greed or curiosity, but by longing. The desire to see Ariana again, to ask for forgiveness. Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love, he tells Harry in the final book. It is a line shaped by his own torment. For no man in the wizarding world understood better than Albus Dumbledore what it meant to live without forgiveness. The irony is cruel. The man who defeated the darkest wizard of his age once stood side by side with another. The man who guided Harry to destroy the Deathly Hallows once sought them himself. The man who preached humility once believed he could rule for the greater good. But beneath the contradictions lies a single truth. Everything Dumbledore became, good and bad, began with Ariana's death. It was her absence that forged his compassion, and her memory that defined his restraint. The films, in their pursuit of grandeur, only hint at this hidden tragedy, a brief mention in The Crimes of Grindelwald, a shadow in Aberforth's eyes. But the books give it life. They remind us that even the greatest among us are shaped not only by triumphs, but by losses. In every choice Dumbledore made, every secret kept, every risk taken, every tear unshed, Ariana's ghost was there, silent but present. Her tragedy is not just a side note in his story, it is the reason his story exists at all. The tale of Ariana Dumbledore is one of innocence destroyed, of love buried under ambition, and of guilt that outlived both youth and glory. It is the story the films left untold, yet without it Dumbledore's wisdom loses its weight, his fear of power loses its origin, and his compassion loses its cause. To understand Albus Dumbledore, one must see him not as the headmaster on the tower, but as the brother kneeling beside his sister's grave, a man who once believed he could change the world, only to learn that the greatest magic is the courage to live with one's own mistakes. Number 17, House Elves, the unseen warriors of the war. In the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, while spells burst across the great hall like lightning and the walls trembled under the weight of destruction, few could have noticed the small figures that moved between the giants of the conflict. They were not wizards, nor were they soldiers of the Order of the Phoenix. They were house elves, silent, swift, and fiercely loyal. Hidden beneath the smoke and the cries, they fought a battle of their own. Their war was not one of glory or recognition, it was one of devotion, of an ancient debt finally being repaid. When J.K. Rowling wrote of them charging into the fray, she revealed a truth that the films chose to erase, that freedom is often defended by those who were never granted it. In the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, there is a line that passes quickly for those who read it, without pause, yet it holds the weight of centuries of servitude. In front of them all, the locket of Regulus Black swinging wildly, ran Creature, brandishing a frying pan like a weapon and yelling, "Fight! Fight for my master! Defender of House Elves, fight for my master, Regulus!" It was not a simple cry. It was the voice of an entire enslaved race, finally breaking through silence. Creature, the bitter old elf who once cursed Harry's friends and worshipped purebloods, led his kin into battle, not for his chains, but for the memory of the one wizard who had treated him with compassion. That act, though barely mentioned in the book and absent from the film, was nothing short of revolutionary. For decades, house elves had lived in the kitchens of Hogwarts, unseen by most, and unthanked by nearly all. They scrubbed the floors, cooked the feasts, and polished the goblets from which wizards drank. They were the invisible machinery of comfort. Even Hermione Granger, with all her fiery sense of justice, had failed to convince others that these beings deserved rights and dignity. The Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, SPEW, became a running joke in the books, a symbol of misplaced idealism. Yet in that final battle, the elves themselves shattered the idea that they were helpless or subservient. When the walls of their home trembled, they rose. It is one of the most overlooked acts of courage in the entire saga. The films gave us the image of Neville Longbottom holding the sword of Gryffindor, of Molly Weasley facing Bellatrix Lestrange, of Harry meeting Voldemort in the Great Hall. But what they denied us was the sight of small figures emerging from the kitchens, wielding knives, ladles, and iron pans, their eyes blazing with loyalty and rage. The book tells us they swarmed through the castle, striking at Death Eater's ankles, tripping them, cutting them with enchanted kitchen tools. Theirs was a rebellion wrapped in service. For once, they were not serving anyone. They were defending what was rightfully theirs, their home, their masters, who had shown them kindness, and the memory of Dobby, who had died for freedom. Kreacher's cry, "For Regulus!" was more than personal vengeance. It was the transformation of a servant into a leader. Regulus Black, once a Death Eater himself, had turned against Voldemort and died trying to destroy one of his Horcruxes. Kreacher had been forced to obey the cruel orders of the Dark Lord's followers, and the guilt of Regulus's death had tormented him for decades. But in that battle, when he led the elves of Hogwarts, he finally found redemption. It was not Harry's leadership that stirred them. It was the moral courage of a creature who had known both cruelty and loyalty. In that moment, Kreacher became what few wizards ever were, a true soldier of conscience. The symbolism could not be more profound. While the powerful wizards of the world argued about blood purity and magical superiority, the smallest and most oppressed beings fought for ideals greater than themselves. They did not seek medals or recognition. They did not fight for power. They fought for belonging. Rowling gave them that one moment of liberation, a fleeting glimpse of what it means to rise from servitude, and yet the filmmakers removed it, reducing the war to wands and curses, as if the moral depth of the story could not survive a saucepan raised in defiance. If we look closely, the House Elves' participation mirrors the very heart of the story of Harry Potter. Throughout the series, love and loyalty are shown to be stronger than any spell. It is love that saves Harry from Voldemort as a baby. It is loyalty that brings Dobby to Malfoy Manor to rescue him. When Kreacher leads his army, he acts from the same source of power that Voldemort could never understand: affection, memory, and faithfulness. They have no wands, yet they possess the one magic that cannot be taught at Hogwarts, the courage to serve without chains. Imagine the scene that never made it to film. In the smoky great hall where giants clash and spells burst through stained glass, the doors to the kitchen swing open. Out pour hundreds of elves, their white tea-towel tunics fluttering like banners of defiance. Kreacher runs at the front, his eyes fierce, the silver locket of Regulus shining against his chest. Behind him, the clang of metal, pots and ladles turned into weapons, fills the hall like the beat of a war drum. The Death Eaters, towering above them, would have been stunned. For the first time in history, creatures bred for servitude struck back. It would have been a moment of poetic justice, the kind that turns fantasy into myth. Even without wands, the elves possessed their own form of power. In earlier books, we see Dobby perform feats that astonish even skilled wizards. He snaps his fingers to disarm Lucius Malfoy, disappears without apparition permission, and saves Harry from mortal danger multiple times. Elves have their own ancient magic, older in some ways than wizardry itself. When dozens of them act together, that force must have been formidable. The image of them swarming through the corridors, freeing wounded students, shielding them from curses, and dragging fallen bodies to safety brings a new layer to the understanding of the Battle of Hogwarts. It was not a fight won solely by those who wielded wands. It was won by everyone who believed in the right to live free. Dobby's sacrifice earlier in the story set the tone for this rebellion. His last words, "Such a beautiful place to be with friends." Dobby is happy to be with his friend Harry Potter, are perhaps the purest expression of the series' theme of freedom through love. When the elves charge under Creature's command, they are not only defending Hogwarts, they are honouring Dobby. He was the first of them to act openly against tyranny, the one who broke the taboo of obedience. His death planted a seed of courage, and by the end, it blooms into collective action. Rowling, through symbolism, gave Dobby what all heroes long for: legacy. There is also something quietly subversive in the fact that the elves fight alongside wizards who never truly valued them. Most students never saw the ones who made their meals. They ate, studied, and fought without realizing that hundreds of unseen hands kept their world running. When the elves join the fight, they are not doing it for gratitude. They are doing it because for once they are choosing. That act of choice is the very essence of freedom. The films, in omitting this, stripped away one of the series' most human lessons: that courage is not reserved for the powerful. The transformation of Creature himself stands as one of the most compelling redemptions in the books. He begins as a symbol of everything twisted by blood purity, hateful, servile, bitter. But when Harry shows him respect, giving him Regulus's locket as a sign of trust, something in him changes. He cleans Grimmauld Place not out of duty but pride. He cooks for them, speaks kindly, even offers comfort. By the time the battle comes, he has found a cause worth dying for. "For my master, Regulus," is not merely a battle cry, it is a declaration of identity reclaimed. He is no longer a servant of a bloodline, but a defender of a principle. That is why his leadership matters more than any wizard's spell. There is an irony, almost tragic, in the fact that the wizarding world, and later the filmmakers, refused to see them. Their contribution vanished, as if history itself conspired to keep them in the shadows. But the truth of fiction often lies between the lines. The elves' uprising reminds us that revolutions rarely begin in palaces. They begin in kitchens, in the quiet places where the oppressed whisper of dignity. When they ran out to defend Hogwarts, the elves were writing their own chapter in the story of resistance, one that history and Hollywood chose to forget. What Rowling crafted in those few paragraphs was a mirror to our own world. The House Elves battle was not just magical fantasy, it was allegory. It spoke of every unseen worker who keeps the world turning, every hand that cleans, cooks and mends, while others take credit. The omission of their courage from the screen reflects something disturbingly real: how easily society erases those who labor in silence. Creature's army deserve to be seen because their story is the story of all who fight without glory. When the dust of the battle settled and the banners of Hogwarts fluttered again in peace, no song was sung for them. The films moved on to the triumph of the chosen few, leaving the elves behind as if they had never been there. Yet somewhere in the castle's kitchens, perhaps, the clatter of pots still echoed with memory. The echo of tiny feet rushing into battle, of voices crying not for masters, but for meaning. In those echoes lives one of the greatest secrets of Harry Potter, that heroism wears many faces, and sometimes the smallest among us carry the heaviest burdens. Number 18. Luna Lovegood and Her Father. Luna Lovegood's world was always painted in soft, peculiar colours, pastel tones of moonlight and mist. In the films, she drifts through the story like a gentle spectre, her voice dreamy, her mind seemingly lost in wonder. But behind the whimsical charm and unblinking serenity lies a story that the movies barely whisper about. A story of loss, devotion, and a father's desperate act of betrayal. In the books, Luna's life is not merely about eccentricity. It is about resilience, about the quiet endurance of love that chooses forgiveness over bitterness, and it begins long before she ever steps onto the Hogwarts Express. Her mother, Pandora Lovegood, was a witch with a curious mind and a talent for experimental magic. When Luna was only 9 years old, one of her mother's spells went tragically wrong, killing her instantly. J.K. Rowling writes that Luna saw the accident happen, and from that moment, something in her perception of life shifted forever. While most children would have been crushed by grief, Luna developed an acceptance of death that few others could comprehend. She told Harry in Order of the Phoenix, "You heard them just beyond the veil, didn't you? They're not gone." That quiet certainty that life and death were not enemies but neighbours separated by a thin curtain became her shield against despair. Her father, Xenophilius Lovegood, held on to her as the only fragment of his wife that remained, and together they built a world filled with creatures that no one else could see, and truths that no one else believed. Their home, the Rookery, stood isolated on a hill near Ottery St. Catchpole, a spiralling tower filled with spinning prints, wind chimes, and stacks of the Quibbler, Xenophilius's magazine. It was both a sanctuary and a symbol of defiance. In the wizarding world, conformity often brought safety, but Xenophilius refused to bend to convention. He published articles questioning the ministry, stories about crumple-horned snorkacs and blibbering humdingers, and even conspiracy theories that many mocked. Yet the Quibbler was not just eccentric nonsense. When the Daily Prophet turned into a propaganda machine during Voldemort's return, it was the Quibbler that printed Harry Potter's true account of the resurrection of the Dark Lord. "Xenophilius Lovegood has gone bravely where the Daily Prophet fears to tread," said Hermione, admiring his courage. "But bravery is a flame that flickers when the wind of fear grows too strong. When Luna was taken by Death Eaters in her 5th year, that flame nearly went out. The ministry had fallen, and anyone opposing the new regime paid dearly. The Snatchers raided homes, and the Quibbler's anti-Voldemort stance became an act of treason. The Lovegoods' defiance made them targets. Luna was captured on the Hogwarts Express, taken to the dungeons of Malfoy Manor, a place where screams replaced laughter and hope became a whisper. Xenophilius was left behind, broken, desperate, and alone. His magazine, once a beacon of truth, was reduced to a plea for mercy. Every issue became filled with praise for the Dark Lord, desperate propaganda designed to draw sympathy from those who held his daughter captive. By the time Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrived at the Rookery in the Deathly Hallows, Xenophilius was no longer the idealistic publisher they remembered. The man who had once printed truth in defiance of fear was trembling beneath its weight. When they arrived, expecting sanctuary, they found instead a haunted man. "They've got my Luna," he told them, eyes wide and hollow. And when Harry mentioned her name, his voice cracked in pain. Rowling describes him as pale and dishevelled, his eyes darting toward the window as though expecting danger at any moment. He served them tea with shaking hands, pretending to be a gracious host, while inside a storm of terror was rising. The symbol that hung around his neck, the Deathly Hallows sign, was a clue and a curse. He believed the Hallows were real, that the Resurrection Stone, the Elder Wand, and the Invisibility Cloak were not myths, but artifacts that could shift the balance of fate. When Harry asked about the symbol, Xenophilius's eyes gleamed with fanatic fascination. He explained that the triangle represented the cloak, the circle, the stone, and the line, the wand, together forming mastery over death itself. Yet even as he spoke of conquering death, he was already defeated by his own fear of losing the one person he loved most. His voice trembled, not from conviction, but from the unbearable weight of what he was about to do. The betrayal came quietly, as all great tragedies do. Xenophilius excused himself, stepping away under the pretense of fetching something, and instead sent an owl to the Death Eaters. His plan was painfully human, a father's bargain with evil. If he delivered Harry Potter, perhaps they would return Luna. "I did it for Luna," he confesses when the truth bursts forth. They were going to kill her. In that single confession lies the rawest kind of love. Love twisted by fear, degraded by helplessness. The books make it clear that his actions were not born of malice but of despair. He had watched his wife die before his eyes. He could not bear to lose his daughter the same way. The moment when the trio realizes the betrayal is among the most chilling in the entire series. The rookery turns from haven to trap. The walls that once felt whimsical now seem oppressive. Hermione's quick thinking saves them, conjuring a false explosion that topples the Lovegoods' home as they disapparate. Behind them, Xenophilius screams her name into the wreckage, his voice cracking like shattered glass. It is a moment that the films chose to ignore, reducing his complexity to a brief, harmless eccentricity. Yet on the page, it becomes one of the most emotionally charged betrayals in the series. Not because it is evil, but because it is understandable. This act transforms Luna in subtle but profound ways. When we next see her, imprisoned in Malfoy Manor, she is calm, gentle, and comforting even to the others who are terrified. Dobby's rescue finds her speaking softly to Ollivander, soothing the old wand-maker while she herself bears the trauma of captivity. "We'll be all right," she tells him with that same steady voice that once spoke of creatures others mocked. The contrast between her serenity and her father's collapse is striking. Xenophilius's love led him to betrayal. Luna's love leads her to forgiveness. She carries no bitterness, no shame for her father's weakness. She understands, perhaps more than anyone, that fear makes fools of even the wisest hearts. When Harry meets her again at Shell Cottage, there is no trace of resentment in her. She does not speak of her father's actions. She does not seek sympathy. Her presence radiates peace, as if she has already forgiven him long before he forgave himself. It is this quiet grace that sets her apart. While others fight their battles with wands and curses, Luna fights hers with compassion. In a world driven by vengeance and ideology, she remains the embodiment of understanding. Later, during the Battle of Hogwarts, Luna's transformation becomes complete. When Harry is lost, suffocating under the weight of death and destiny, it is Luna who shows him the way. "You've got to come and see the diadem," she insists, dragging him from despair toward purpose. Her clarity in chaos, her ability to see through illusion, is no accident. She has learned from loss, from captivity, and from the mistakes of her father that truth often hides in places others refuse to look. After the war, when the dust settles and the world begins to rebuild, Xenophilius's redemption is never written explicitly, but it breathes between the lines. Rowling hints that he and Luna reconcile, that he returns to the Quibbler's true roots, once again publishing the odd and the true without fear. In a way, his story mirrors that of the wizarding world, broken, ashamed, yet capable of change. The Lovegoods Tower may have crumbled, but the foundation, love, forgiveness, curiosity, remained untouched. The films show Luna standing among the crowd at Hogwarts, her wide eyes still full of wonder, but they do not tell us why that wonder matters. They do not show us the darkness she had to walk through to keep that light. They leave out the trembling father who bartered with evil to save his child, and the daughter who forgave him without words. That silence, that missing piece, robs her of depth, because the Luna who emerges from Xenophilius's betrayal is not just a quirky side character. She is the living proof that innocence can survive corruption without becoming naive. In the end, the Lovegoods story is one of reflection. Xenophilius represents the fear that love can breed when it becomes desperate. Luna represents the love that endures even when fear has failed. Their bond, though fractured by betrayal, becomes a portrait of humanity's two faces, and the one that falters and the one that forgives. When he said, "I did it for Luna," it was not an excuse, it was a confession. And when Luna later smiled again, it was her answer, an act of forgiveness far more powerful than any spell. That is the secret the films forgot to tell. The Lovegoods are not merely oddities in a world of magic. They are its conscience. Beneath the whimsy lies the purest truth of all. The love is fragile, flawed, and yet, when it forgives, it becomes unbreakable. Number 19. The hidden meaning behind the Horcruxes. When Harry first destroyed Tom Riddle's diary in the Chamber of Secrets, he did not realize he was ending the life of a Horcrux. What appeared to be an impulsive act of desperation, thrusting the basilisk fang through the pages, was, in truth, the first moment of spiritual rebellion against Voldemort's perverted form of immortality. The venom of the basilisk, described in the Chamber of Secrets as a poison so deadly that even Phoenix, tears barely counted it, became more than just a chemical weapon. It was a manifestation of death itself, raw, uncontrollable, and pure. It symbolized that life cannot be preserved through the manipulation of death, and that destruction can carry sanctity when it restores balance. When the ink of the diary bled like a living wound, it was not paper that died, but a fragment of a soul clinging to deceit. Years later, Dumbledore understood this connection better than anyone. In The Half-Blood Prince, he told Harry, "Only that which carries true life can undo what feeds on death." The headmaster knew that Horcruxes could not be destroyed through common means, because they were not objects in the usual sense. They were anchors to something divine and corrupted. Each Horcrux required an act that reflected the nature of sacrifice, not simply power. The destruction of the diary with venom symbolized innocence, reclaiming purity from corruption. The basilisk, a creature of darkness, became ironically the agent of purification. In that irony lay Rowling's deeper message, the tools of darkness, when touched by courage and selflessness, could become the weapons of light. When Dumbledore destroyed Marvolo Gaunt's ring, he did so at a terrible cost. The ring was cursed, its power entwined with Voldemort's obsession with family and bloodline. Dumbledore's decision to destroy it with the sword of Gryffindor, soaked in basilisk venom from the chamber, bound his fate to the moral essence of the act. He knew the curse would take his life. He accepted it. It was not an accident that his hand blackened and withered, or that he bore the injury without complaint. The ring's destruction symbolized his acceptance of mortality. By allowing himself to die, Dumbledore destroyed the illusion that Voldemort's philosophy could offer eternal life. The ring's demise was not a victory of magic, but of humility. "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love," he would later say, and the truth of that line lived in the sacrifice he had already made. The locket of Salazar Slytherin carried another kind of poison, psychological, not physical. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione wore it, it gnawed at their hearts, amplifying jealousy, anger, and fear. Voldemort's soul fragment infected emotions because it thrived on weakness. The destruction of the locket when Ron used the sword of Gryffindor was a moment of redemption. Ron faced visions designed to break him, images of Harry and Hermione mocking him, denying his worth, his love, his belonging. Least loved, always the last to be chosen, the locket hissed before it was destroyed. By striking it down, Ron was not only killing the Horcrux, he was conquering the dark mirror of his own soul. This act embodied Dumbledore's lesson: conquering death requires conquering fear, jealousy, and pride, the very roots of Voldemort's downfall. In that moment, Ron Weasley proved himself stronger than the magic of the Dark Lord. Hermione's destruction of Hufflepuff's cup was an equally spiritual act. Deep within the Chamber of Secrets, she used the basilisk fang once again. The venom burned through the golden surface, and from the cup rose a scream, not of pain, but of release. Hermione, the symbol of intellect and order, had to descend into the chaos of death to end something born of arrogance. The cup, representing loyalty and purity, had been defiled by Voldemort's deceit. Its destruction through the fang echoed the cleansing power of knowledge guided by courage. Hermione's act also reconnected the narrative to its beginning. The same weapon that had once destroyed the diary now served again, showing that redemption often follows circular paths. The venom, absorbed by the fang and later by the sword, was not simply deadly, it was sacred, carrying the truth that some poisons cleanse more deeply than any cure. Perhaps the most tragic of all destructions was that of Ravenclaw's diadem. It had rested for centuries in the room of requirement, forgotten by the world, but not by the darkness. The diadem symbolized wisdom corrupted by vanity, a mirror to Voldemort's intellect without empathy. When Vincent Crabbe unleashed the Fiendfyre, that uncontrollable magical inferno consumed everything indiscriminately. The flames took the shape of monstrous serpents and eagles, devouring both Horcrux and Creator. It was an act born from arrogance, yet it achieved what the heroes could not. The Fiendfyre, wild, chaotic, uncontrollable, was the opposite of Voldemort's obsession with control. His entire philosophy rested on mastering death, taming nature, subjugating fate. And yet it was chaos, not order, that undid him. The fire that destroyed the diadem was a reflection of the moral law that governed Rowling's world. What you fear most often becomes the instrument of your downfall. The destruction of Nagini, Voldemort's final living Horcrux, carried a biblical weight. Neville Longbottom, once dismissed as clumsy and timid, became the one who struck the decisive blow. He used the sword of Gryffindor, the weapon of those who are truly brave of heart. When he severed Nagini's head, it was not just an act of heroism. It was the moment prophecy met choice. The serpent, symbol of original sin and deception, fell by the hand of one who had embraced truth and loyalty. Neville's act represented humanity's ultimate triumph over temptation. he had no guarantee of survival. He acted out of pure conviction. The films present this as a climactic moment of battle, but in the books it is suffused with grace. The sword appeared to him because, in that instant, he embodied the same purity that once allowed Godric Gryffindor to wield it. "Help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who deserve it," Dumbledore had once said, and Neville's courage proved that worthiness is not born of destiny, but of choice. Harry's own death, his walk into the forest, was the destruction of the final Horcrux, the one hidden within himself. Voldemort had unwittingly tied his soul to the boy he had tried to kill, creating a living paradox. To destroy that part of the Dark Lord, Harry had to die willingly. This was not suicide, nor surrender. It was the ultimate act of acceptance. "Does it hurt?" he asked Dumbledore in the spectral King's Cross station. "Dying? Not at all," came the reply, quicker and easier than falling asleep. In that serene exchange lay the moral nucleus of the entire saga. Immortality sought through fear breeds torment, but immortality achieved through love transcends death. Harry did what Voldemort never could. He accepted his mortality, and in doing so became unconquerable. The Resurrection Stone, which he dropped before facing Voldemort, symbolized his rejection of power over death. It was a quiet defiance far greater than any spell. What the films simplify into spectacle was, in Rowling's writing, a pilgrimage of the soul. Every Horcrux was a lesson in facing a different aspect of human frailty. The diary represented innocence corrupted by deceit, the ring pride masquerading as love, the locket envy, the cup greed, the diadem vanity, the serpent destruction, and Harry himself, the redemption of it all. Each destruction corresponded to a moral victory. These were not magical duels, but spiritual confrontations. Rowling's phrase, "to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure," encapsulates what Voldemort could never grasp. Death was not to be conquered, but understood, not feared, but embraced. The basilisk's fang and the sword of Gryffindor were the constant threads in this tapestry of redemption. The fang absorbed venom, the symbol of death, and the sword, forged in courage, absorbed the fang's venom. It was an alchemy of virtue, death purified through bravery. In mythology, such weapons are not made by hands, but by deeds. The sword responded only to those who proved worthy, making its appearances not coincidences, but revelations. When Ron, Hermione, and Neville each used it, they repeated the same spiritual pattern, facing inner demons, sacrificing comfort, embracing danger. In every strike, the sword reminded them, and us, that the true weapon against evil is not magic, but purity of intent. Even Crabbe's Fiendfyre, though born of folly, mirrored this truth. The uncontrollable flames were an echo of divine wrath, terrifying, purging, uncontaminated by reason. They consumed both sin and sinner. In a world obsessed with control, Rowling showed that salvation sometimes requires surrender, to chaos, to destiny, to truth. Voldemort sought to bind his soul to the material world. The Fiendfyre shattered that illusion. It proved that even in the magical universe, the laws of balance remain absolute. The more tightly one clings to life, the more violently one is reclaimed by death. What remains unspoken in the films is the quiet aftermath of each destruction. Harry felt the pain of every Horcrux as if it were his own wound, the locket's scream, the diary's black ink, the ring's curse. They were echoes of a single soul fragment being reclaimed by the natural order. Dumbledore's words, "Do not fear the dead," resound because every death in this saga restores something broken. Even the inanimate Horcruxes, once destroyed, seem to release, not horror, but peace. Rowling's descriptions are filled with imagery of light and silence after each destruction, as though the world exhaled. It was as though a great weight had lifted, she wrote when the locket was destroyed. That was not metaphor, it was absolution. Voldemort's fear of death was his greatest Horcrux, the invisible one he never destroyed. Every other fragment was only a reflection of that terror. The others, Harry, Dumbledore, Hermione, Ron, Neville, each learned to look into the abyss and not flinch. That was their true victory. The films, though grand in visuals, could not capture the invisible transformation that occurred within each act of destruction. Rowling's text reveals that the war against Voldemort was not fought in battlefields or classrooms, but in the human heart. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities, Dumbledore had said. The destruction of the Horcruxes was a sequence of such choices, each one a refusal to submit to fear. When the dust settled and Voldemort's body lay still, the true magic was silence. The Horcruxes were gone, but what they represented, the human craving for control over mortality, remained a warning. Each destroyed fragment carried with it a piece of understanding that life gains meaning only when it ends, and that love, not power, is the one force that binds the world beyond death. What the films showed as flashes of battle, the books whispered as a hymn of sacrifice. Every Horcrux destroyed was a confession, every scream an absolution, every death a return to wholeness. And perhaps that is why when Harry looked upon Voldemort's lifeless face, he felt not triumph, but pity for the man who feared death so deeply that he forgot how to live. Number 20. The Secret Life of Ginny Weasley After the War. In the films, Ginny Weasley's story fades into the background, as though she exists only in the shadow of Harry Potter's legend. Yet in the world J.K. Rowling built, Ginny's life after the Battle of Hogwarts was rich, fierce, and marked by her own victories. She was never meant to be just the chosen one's wife. Those who read beyond the screen know that Ginny's life carried the energy of rebellion and the quiet authority of someone who had already fought darkness once and refused to be defined by it. In the years immediately following the war, Ginny was restless. The scars of battle ran deep. Fred's death had torn a hole in her family, and she often visited the burrow just to sit in silence with George, who could barely speak her name, without flinching. But Ginny had inherited her mother's fire and her father's compassion, and it was that combination that drove her forward. She refused to become another symbol of loss. When the opportunity came to try out for the Holyhead Harpies, the most prestigious all-female Quidditch team in Britain, she didn't hesitate. She was 20 years old, full of unspent courage, and determined to live a life worth fighting for. Her rise on the Harpies was meteoric. Former Harpy captain Gwenog Jones once said that Ginny played as if the bludgers were personal insults. In matches, she was a blur of red and gold, agile and daring, often the one who would attempt a goal no one else dared to try. The Daily Prophet called her a storm with a broom, and the fans adored her for her fearlessness. Ginny became a symbol of post-war renewal, proof that life could bloom again even after the darkest night. It wasn't just about Quidditch, it was about reclaiming joy from the ruins. Rowling herself confirmed Ginny's professional triumphs in later writings. Ginny Potter, née Weasley, former star of the Holyhead Harpies, now senior Quidditch correspondent for the Daily Prophet. That small note in Pottermore was more than a line, it was a glimpse into how she rebuilt herself. While many characters from the war sought peace in anonymity, Ginny found it in motion. She was still fighting, but now the battlefield was the sky. Her matches became events that drew thousands. Children wore her name on their jerseys. And when she finally retired, it was not because she was tired, but because she had already achieved everything she had dreamed of. Her transition to journalism surprised many, but not those who truly knew her. Ginny had always been observant. From the very first book, when she watched Harry leave for Hogwarts with wide, hopeful eyes, she had been quietly studying people. As a reporter for the Daily Prophet, she was bold, unafraid to question biased coverage or ministry interference. She once wrote an article about the Chudley Cannon's decline that was so blunt, Ron didn't speak to her for 3 days. But that was Ginny, fearless, even when it came to family. She turned Quidditch reporting into something that celebrated courage and teamwork, rather than celebrity gossip. Her work at the Prophet also revealed her integrity. When rumours spread about a possible return of dark activity in Eastern Europe, Ginny refused to sensationalize it, writing instead, "Fear thrives where truth is silenced." Those words echoed her wartime experience and the lessons she had learned under the shadow of Voldemort's regime. For Ginny, journalism wasn't about fame, it was about protecting truth. It was her new way of fighting for what was right, with a quill instead of a wand. Her marriage to Harry was quieter than fans might have imagined. There were no grand displays of affection or dramatic arguments. Both had seen too much of death to waste time on trivial quarrels. What bound them together was not romance, but resilience. Harry often said that Ginny's presence kept him grounded, and it was true. She understood his silence, his nightmares, his occasional distance. Unlike others who saw the boy who lived, Ginny saw the man who had survived and carried the cost. "You don't need to save the world every day," she would remind him. And perhaps in that quiet strength, she saved him in her own way. Her relationship with her children, James, Albus, and Lily, was equally defined by balance. Ginny raised them with warmth, but also with the understanding that they bore a legacy not of fame, but of responsibility. When Albus struggled to find his place at Hogwarts, it was Ginny who reminded him that courage had many forms. Her maternal side was never soft in the traditional sense. It was fierce, protective, and wise. She often said that being a mother was the hardest match of her life, yet one she refused to lose. What the films failed to show is how Ginny carried her strength quietly. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, her defiance was already visible when she joined Dumbledore's army and faced Death Eaters at 15. She was the youngest member of the Weasley family, yet the one who walked into the Chamber of Secrets and came out alive, changed forever. That trauma shaped her, but she never allowed it to define her. "The thing about growing up with 6 brothers," she once said in the book, "is that you learn to give as good as you get." Behind that humour was steel. The Battle of Hogwarts revealed that steel fully. When Harry left to face Voldemort alone, Ginny didn't break down. She fought until the very end, dueling Death Eaters alongside her mother and Hermione. Rowling described her as pale but determined, her eyes blazing. That blaze never went out. It is that fire, unseen in the films, that shaped the woman she became. She was not a side character. She was a survivor, learning how to live again in a world that no longer demanded constant bravery, but quiet endurance. Rowling hinted at Ginny's independence through subtle details. While Hermione joined the Ministry of Magic and Ron helped George with Weasley's wizard wheezes, Ginny's path was entirely her own. She didn't follow anyone's lead. Even her decision to leave Quidditch to start a family came on her own terms. "I've had my glory," she told a friend in one interview, Rowling published later, "and now I want peace. But peace doesn't mean stopping. That simple sentence reflected the maturity the films never explored. In the years that followed, Ginny became something of a legend among younger witches. Her story was told not as Harry Potter's wife, but as a reminder that heroism comes in many forms. She mentored aspiring athletes, insisting they study history and magical ethics alongside sport. "You can't win if you don't understand what you're playing for," she often said. Under her guidance, the Holyhead Harpies grew into not just a team, but a symbol of empowerment. Her name was synonymous with discipline and compassion, and her influence reached far beyond Quidditch fields. Her friendship with Hermione deepened in adulthood. They often met for tea in Diagon Alley, discussing everything from ministry policies to how best to raise strong daughters in a still healing wizarding world. Hermione once confided that Ginny's calm confidence was the only thing that made sense after the war. Ginny, in turn, admired Hermione's intellect, but often reminded her that emotion was strength, not weakness. Their bond became one of quiet mutual respect, a reflection of how female characters in Rowling's world evolved into pillars of wisdom and change. There were darker years, too. When Harry returned to active duty as head of the Auror office, Ginny faced long nights waiting for him to come home. The fear never fully left her. It was the same chill she had known as a girl when the diary whispered in her ear. But she managed it differently now, with patience and faith. She learned that love was not about constant presence, but trust. Those moments tested her far more than any Quidditch match, and yet they made her love story all the more real. Later in life, Ginny became something akin to the conscience of the wizarding world's media. She pushed for transparency, encouraged young journalists, and even campaigned against the Daily Prophet when it attempted to publish unverified stories about her husband's department. Her editorial titled Truth Above Triumph became a touchstone for aspiring writers. In it, she wrote, "The scars of war remind us not to glorify heroes, but to listen to them when they fall silent." Few could have written that line except someone who had lived through both the war and the aftermath. Her final years, as hinted in Rowling's later interviews, were peaceful but never idle. Ginny often returned to the burrow where grandchildren filled the garden with laughter. She told them stories of flying with the Harpies, but rarely about the war. "Some battles," she said, "don't belong in bedtime stories." Her legacy wasn't one of tragedy, but of balance, the ability to hold strength and tenderness in the same heart. She had known darkness, but she had built her life around light. In the end, the films gave us a glimpse. A quiet smile at King's Cross, a hint of domestic calm, but not the full portrait. The real Ginny Weasley was fire disguised as grace, a woman who carved her own destiny after living through history's darkest days. Her story was not about standing beside Harry Potter, it was about standing as his equal. And though the screen chose silence, the books whispered the truth. Ginny Weasley did not fade, she soared. Number 21, Hermione Granger, the Minister of Magic, they never showed. When the final scene of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, faded into the mist of platform 9 3/4, the audience was left with a quiet, comforting image: Harry, Ron, and Hermione waving goodbye to their children as they boarded the Hogwarts Express. It was a moment of peace after years of darkness, but also a cinematic curtain that fell too soon. Because in that moment, Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, was reduced to a symbol of domesticity, a loving wife and mother, while the books, and later Pottermore, tell a very different story. The truth is that Hermione's life did not end with motherhood. It began again with purpose. Her journey beyond Hogwarts is one of the most extraordinary, untold chapters in wizarding history. After the Battle of Hogwarts, the wizarding world stood in ruins, not only physically but morally. Centuries of prejudice, cruelty, and bureaucratic stagnation had poisoned its institutions. The Ministry of Magic, once the very symbol of order, was exposed as corrupt to its core. And while many wizards turned their backs on it, Hermione Granger walked straight into its heart. According to Pottermore, her first post-war position was in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. For most witches and wizards, this was an obscure office, hardly a glamorous start. But Hermione chose it deliberately. It was here that she continued her crusade for justice, this time for magical beings who had long been silenced and enslaved. This was not a sudden passion. Her compassion for house elves had begun back in her 4th year at Hogwarts, when she founded SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. Many of her peers, including Ron, laughed at her then, but Hermione's sense of justice ran deeper than their amusement. "You know, house elves get a very raw deal," she once exclaimed in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. That same fire would later fuel her political life. As a young official in the ministry, Hermione drafted and implemented legislation that granted house elves and other magical beings basic rights, including freedom from involuntary servitude. It was a quiet revolution, and it faced enormous resistance. Pure-blood traditionalists mocked her reforms as naive idealism. But Hermione never sought popularity. She sought fairness. Her rise through the ministry ranks was steady, fueled by competence, integrity, and an unshakable sense of moral clarity. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who served as Minister for Magic after the war, recognized her potential early on. Under his leadership, Hermione became one of his most trusted advisors, shaping new laws that purged the ministry of the corruption left behind by Voldemort's regime. It was during these years that she gained a reputation as a reformer who balanced idealism with pragmatism. Her ability to negotiate between conservative pure-blood families and progressive reformers made her indispensable. She was no longer just the clever student who corrected everyone's mistakes. She was the woman correcting a system. Pottermore later confirmed what many suspected. Hermione Granger eventually became Minister for Magic herself. Hermione Granger, Minister for Magic of Great Britain, her reforms changed the very structure of the wizarding world, reads the entry. It was a historical first. No Muggle-born had ever held that position. The ministry, which once persecuted her kind, now stood under her leadership. It was not just symbolic, it was revolutionary. Hermione's appointment signaled the end of centuries of prejudice embedded in magical institutions. The same system that once branded her as mudblood now called her Madam Minister. One of Hermione's most impactful reforms involved magical education. During her tenure, she pushed through a sweeping revision of Hogwarts' curriculum. She eliminated outdated discriminatory teachings that subtly reinforced blood superiority. Instead, she introduced courses on magical ethics, interspecies cooperation, and the history of Muggle-wizard relations. She ensured that every young witch and wizard learned not only spells but also empathy, the one quality most absent from the previous generation. Her belief that knowledge must be paired with conscience echoed her own student days, when she constantly reminded her friends that books and cleverness meant nothing without courage and compassion. Hermione also addressed the long-standing isolation between the magical and Muggle worlds. For centuries, the two societies coexisted in secrecy, each ignorant of the other's struggles. Under Hermione's administration, discreet channels of communication were opened with the British Muggle government. She advocated for mutual understanding rather than mutual avoidance. It was said that the first time a Muggle Prime Minister met Hermione Granger, he remarked that she was the most logical witch in an illogical world. Her ability to navigate both realities, as a witch born to Muggle parents, made her uniquely suited to bridge that ancient divide. Her work was not without opposition. Old families, like the Malfoys and the Knotts, viewed her rise as the ultimate insult to their heritage. Newspapers aligned with conservative factions painted her as a radical disruptor, accusing her of dismantling wizarding tradition. But Hermione, having faced prejudice since childhood, was unshaken. She knew that progress was never comfortable. The same courage that led her to walk through the fires of war now guided her through the fires of bureaucracy. The scars of the Battle of Hogwarts had not faded, but they had transformed into a map, showing her where change was most needed. In her private life, Hermione balanced public duty with family. She married Ron Weasley, her longtime friend and companion through the darkest years. Their partnership remained strong but realistic, not the fairy tale romance fans might imagine. While Ron eventually co-owned Weasley's Wizard Wheezes with George, Hermione's world revolved around governance. Yet she was not absent as a mother. Her children, Rose and Hugo, grew up in an environment where equality, intellect, and empathy were the family creed. For Hermione, love was not measured by time spent at home, but by the legacy she built for their generation. Her tenure as minister also oversaw the creation of the Magical Equality Commission, an independent body designed to investigate discrimination cases across all sectors of wizarding life. The Commission's founding charter bore Hermione's signature beneath a single line she had insisted on writing herself: "Magic makes us powerful. Our choices make us human." Those words became the cornerstone of her administration. For the first time in history, goblins, centaurs, and even part-human hybrids had legal representation in the ministry. It was a vision of inclusivity that the wizarding world had never dared to imagine. Hermione's intellectual rigor never faded. She continued publishing academic essays on magical lore and the ethics of spell creation, subjects few ministers had ever dared to approach. Her paper, The Ethics of Enchantment, a Study of Magical Consent, became required reading for Auror trainees and ministry interns. It argued that spells, like weapons, carried moral weight. A radical idea in a culture accustomed to viewing magic as neutral. Her influence spread beyond policy. She changed the way wizards thought about their own power. Even decades later, veterans of the ministry still recalled the early years of Hermione's reforms as a time of friction and awakening. The archives mention that under her leadership, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement reopened investigations into crimes committed under Voldemort's regime, not for revenge, but for accountability. Files once sealed in secrecy were unrolled on her desk, revealing names of collaborators who had escaped justice. It was said that when she read those names, her hand did not tremble, only her voice when she declared, "Truth is not vengeance, it is cleansing." That phrase became a moral compass for the post-war generation. Her legacy eventually reached even Hogwarts itself. Statues of past headmasters were joined by one of Hermione Granger, unveiled in the Great Hall decades after her graduation. Beneath her likeness were inscribed words from the Deathly Hallows. Books and cleverness, there are more important things: friendship and bravery. Students were taught not only about her spells or achievements, but about her heart, the thing that made her the greatest witch of her time. For many young witches, she became what Dumbledore once called the best kind of leader, one who leads because she must, not because she wishes to. The irony remains that the films, with all their visual brilliance, chose to leave this story untold. They showed Hermione as a hero of war, but not of peace. The audience never saw her standing at the podium of the rebuilt ministry, her voice steady as she introduced the Equality of All Magical Beings Act. They never saw her signature glowing beneath the golden seal of the Minister for Magic. But somewhere in the canon, beyond the silver screen, that image exists. A woman who turned intellect into policy, compassion into law, and courage into reform. If Harry Potter defeated Voldemort's body, Hermione Granger defeated his ideology. She dismantled the invisible chains that bound wizarding society to fear and prejudice. Her magic was not in the strength of her wand, but in the clarity of her mind. And though the films chose to close her story on a quiet train platform, the truth whispered through the pages of Pottermore tells us something greater, that the girl who once fought for house elves became the woman who led an entire world toward justice. Number 22, Draco Malfoy, A Path Through Guilt and Solitude. Draco Malfoy was never meant to be a villain in the traditional sense. In the films, he stands in the shadow of Harry Potter, a pale, arrogant boy with slicked-back hair and cruel smirks. But the truth buried within J.K. Rowling's books reveals a far more tragic and complex figure. Behind the smirk was fear. Behind the arrogance was desperation. Draco Malfoy's journey through guilt, loneliness, and redemption is one of the most overlooked transformations in the entire saga, a quiet echo of the war that left deep scars not only on heroes, but also on those who once stood on the wrong side. When Draco first appeared at Hogwarts, he was the embodiment of pure blood pride. He spoke of his father's influence, mocked Hermione's Muggle-born heritage, and sought validation from those he admired, especially from Professor Snape and the older Slytherins. Yet even then, Rowling left traces of fragility behind his words. He was pale and his hands were shaking slightly, the text notes, when he fails to curse Harry in The Chamber of Secrets. That trembling hand foreshadows the moral conflict that will haunt him for years. Draco's cruelty was not born of true conviction, but of imitation. He was repeating the lessons Lucius Malfoy had carved into him since childhood. By the time we reach the Half-Blood Prince, Draco's facade begins to crack. Tasked with an impossible mission to kill Albus Dumbledore, he transforms from a boastful boy into a haunted young man. Rowling describes him with dark shadows beneath his eyes, his hands trembling as he adjusted the cabinet. In that moment he becomes the victim of his own lineage. Voldemort did not give him the task as a sign of trust, but as punishment for Lucius's failures. Draco's mission was not a test of loyalty, it was a death sentence for him and his family. The films show glimpses of his fear, but they never fully capture the suffocating dread that surrounded him at Hogwarts. His silence in those final chapters speaks louder than words. It is Dumbledore who ultimately saves him. On the astronomy tower, when Draco hesitates to strike, Dumbledore says softly, "You are not a killer, Draco." That single sentence becomes the invisible line dividing his old life from the new. He does not kill, but he also cannot stop what follows. The war continues, and Draco becomes trapped between two worlds. The dying ideology of his parents and the unbearable guilt of survival. After the fall of Voldemort, the wizarding world begins to rebuild, but not all wounds can be healed with time. For Draco, the end of the war was not liberation, but exposure. In the aftermath, the Ministry of Magic conducted trials for Death Eaters, and the Malfoys stood before the court as symbols of everything the New World wanted to destroy. Lucius was stripped of influence, Narcissa remained silent, and Draco was left in the ruins of his family's legacy. According to Rowling's post-war notes, Draco was acquitted thanks to testimony from several witnesses that he had lowered his wand and did not kill. but acquittal did not mean acceptance. The brand of the dark mark did not vanish. It simply faded beneath his sleeve, a reminder of a choice he never truly made. In interviews, Rowling explained that Draco had no wish to join the Death Eaters again, nor any desire for power. He withdrew from public life. This self-imposed isolation became his penance. For years, he lived quietly in Wiltshire, surrounded by the remnants of his family's wealth, but none of its former glory. His manor, once a place of pride, became a mausoleum of memories. Draco long avoided society, reads a line from Rowling's later notes. He devoted himself to his family and to alchemical research. It was during these years that Astoria Greengrass entered his life, a woman from another pure bloodline, yet different from anyone Draco had ever known. Astoria was gentle, thoughtful, and unafraid to challenge the traditions that defined their world. Unlike the daughters of the old families who still whispered about blood purity, Astoria believed in compassion. She had grown up watching the war destroy her friends and understood the futility of hate. Their marriage was quiet and sincere, not an alliance, but a sanctuary. Rowling once described Astoria as a breath of fresh air in Draco's suffocating world. Astoria's influence slowly reshaped him. She taught him empathy, not through arguments, but through quiet defiance. When she refused to raise their son Scorpius with the same prejudices that had once poisoned Draco's childhood, he agreed. Together they created a household where the past was acknowledged but not worshipped. Astoria refused to inculcate her son with the beliefs that Draco was raised with, Rowling explained. Draco accepted this and adored his wife for her bravery. But happiness, for Draco, was never meant to last. Astoria carried a family curse, a blood malediction that had haunted the Greengrass line for generations. By the time Scorpius was born, she was already frail. The films never show the moment her health declines, but the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child gives a heartbreaking glimpse into Draco's later life. In one of his most vulnerable moments, he says, "My wife, Astoria, was frail. She wanted to live quietly for Scorpius's sake. We both knew time was short. Her death broke what remained of his spirit." After her passing, Draco became a widower in his 30s, a man haunted not by war, but by the ghosts of love and loss. He poured himself into caring for Scorpius, shielding him from the cruelty of the wizarding world that still saw the Malfoy name as a shadow of evil. In The Cursed Child, Draco admits that his son has no friends because people think he's Voldemort's child. That stigma, inherited and undeserved, mirrors Draco's own youth. It is through Scorpius that he confronts the pain he once inflicted on others. Every time he sees his son ostracized, he remembers the faces of those he mocked: Hermione, Hagrid, the Weasleys. Draco's transformation is not one of grand gestures, but of quiet endurance. The boy who once boasted about blood purity grows into a man who values kindness above all else. When Harry and Draco finally speak as equals in The Cursed Child, there is no bitterness left, only understanding. "We were both wrong," Draco says, "but we both loved fiercely." It is a simple acknowledgement that years of enmity have dissolved into something resembling respect. The films reduce Draco's story to a few silent scenes: his hesitation during the final battle, his lowered wand, his presence at Platform 9, 3-4. Yet those fleeting moments hide a lifetime of repentance. In the books and play, Draco emerges as a man who survived not by luck, but by a slow, painful evolution. He learns that redemption is not a single act, but a lifelong process. Scorpius becomes the center of his universe, the one person through whom Draco redeems himself. He dedicates his life to ensuring his son never carries the weight of his family's sins. "I would sell everything I own to give him a good life," Draco confesses in the play. This love, quiet, selfless, and unspoken, becomes his salvation. Unlike his father, who used love as control, Draco learns to love through release. In The Cursed Child, his loneliness is palpable. While Harry, Ron, and Hermione remain bound by friendship, Draco stands apart, a man who has chosen solitude over hypocrisy. "I've been alone," he admits, "and it suits me, but not him." The distinction reveals everything. Draco accepts his own isolation as punishment, but refuses to let it consume his son. He spends his days studying alchemy, chasing the secrets of transmutation, perhaps in an unconscious attempt to transform his own tainted soul. Rowling hints that his fascination with alchemy mirrors the philosophical idea of purification, turning base metal into gold, or in Draco's case, turning guilt into wisdom. The alchemist's fire becomes a metaphor for his redemption. Even in grief, he finds purpose. When Scorpius and Albus Potter risk their lives to change the past, Draco does not react with anger, but with fear and love. He joins Harry not as an enemy, but as a father. Their shared desperation bridges the distance that war once created. In those scenes, we finally see the man Draco was always meant to become: protective, loyal, capable of forgiveness. The boy who once sneered at others' weakness learns that true strength lies in vulnerability. The man who once sought power learns that love is his only refuge. In the quiet corridors of his Wiltshire manor, surrounded by books and memories, Draco Malfoy lives not as a villain or a hero, but as something far rarer: a survivor who understands the cost of both pride and mercy. And though the films may never tell this story, the pages of the books and the stage of the play whisper it clearly. Redemption is not loud. It is lived day after day in silence. Number 23. Sirius Black and the truth about his escape. Sirius Black was not a man easily broken, and that truth sits like a heartbeat behind every line of Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban. The films portrayed his escape from Azkaban as something almost mystical, a madman's sudden burst of purpose, fueled only by revenge. But the reality described in J.K. Rowling's book is much darker, far more intelligent, and infinitely more human. The truth is that Sirius did not simply flee because he saw a goal. He survived because he understood something about Azkaban that others never did. The Dementors could not touch the mind of a creature without human emotions. That single insight saved his life and allowed him to do the impossible. Inside the walls of Azkaban, time did not move the way it did in the outside world. Days bled into nights without distinction, and prisoners lost the sense of who they were. The Dementors, feeding on every shred of happiness, left behind hollow shells that barely remembered their names. But Sirius, though he looked like the rest, gaunt, filthy, half-starved, retained a sliver of his humanity by surrendering it at will. He turned into Padfoot, the large black dog that once ran beside James Potter through the Hogwarts grounds. In that form he was not a man haunted by loss, he was a beast guided by instinct, and that made him invisible to the Dementors' hunger. The Dementors could not read the emotions of animals. They hunted human despair, not the still, simple mind of a dog. This was Sirius's secret weapon, the one thing that separated him from every other prisoner who had rotted away behind those iron bars. In the book, Sirius explains this to Harry with unnerving calm. "I was not mad. I knew I was innocent. That wasn't a happy thought, so the Dementors couldn't drain it out of me. But it kept me sane." That knowledge, his innocence, was his anchor, and his animagus form was his refuge. He spent years perfecting the rhythm of transformation, slipping in and out of Padfoot's body as naturally as breathing. While others screamed in the dark, he curled up in silence, conserving strength, letting the Dementors glide past him as if he were nothing but a shadow. This double existence became his way of hiding from despair. He stopped thinking about laughter, about friendship, even about James. He only held on to one fact. He had not betrayed his friends. Peter Pettigrew had, and one day he would prove it. What makes this so extraordinary is that it redefines the entire notion of Sirius's miraculous escape. The films show him as a madman possessed by rage and vengeance, but the book reveals something closer to a calculated, patient survivor. He waited, he endured. For 12 long years he remained half man, half dog, hidden behind the very madness that consumed others. In his animagus form, the Dementors left him alone. In his human form, his willpower kept him sane. It was a delicate balance, the edge between reason and oblivion, and Sirius danced on it longer than any man before or after.